The big daddy of the new Lexus RX large luxury SUV range is the 500h F-Sport Performance. And you don't lob new branding like F-Sport Performance without bringing something fresh to the Lexus table. Lexus has done both hybrids and turbocharging before, but this is the first time that it's combined both in one vehicle. It's also the first purely parallel hybrid system in the stable. But to dive right into the technicalities of a parallel hybrid system, we miss out on some fundamentals, so let's go back to some basics. Chasing cars, honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by
The new 5th generation RX lobbed in Australia a few months back, and the big change in RX land is that they've dropped the 7-seat format in favour of a strict 5-seater. The range kicks off with a gaggle of 350h hybrid versions that kick off from around 87.5 grand. And those you can get in either front or all-wheel drive. The middle of the pack contains half a dozen turbo petrol variants of F-Sport and Sport Luxury grades, and they start from a tender under 6 figures. Right at the top of the pack is this F-Sport Performance, which wants for 126 grand and pretty much includes all the features and tech of the 13 variants below it. Of course, that's how the flagship appears on paper, but we're here to find out what it's like as a tree-topping experience. Speaking of appearance, for my money, this 5th generation is vastly more handsome than the older 4th gen. It's not a huge departure in styling, but really it's cleaner, meaner and more muscular, particularly in the sporting versions. Both the F-Sport and the F-Sport Performance get specific exterior styling, including the so-called seamless front grille. Both versions get huge 21-inch wheels with these massive 6-piston monoblock front brakes. But it's only the Performance version that gets this so-called matte black effect on the wheels, which is actually really satin. The F-Sport Performance gets more colour-matched body panels as well as a lot of black highlights, including this stainless black window frame and these piano black mirror caps. The entire range gets these novel E-latch door handles, which have a little touchpad on the back, so you just pull it rather than pull out a mechanical lever to open the door. They're kind of weird at first, but you do get used to it. In fact, while we're here, let's check out the interior. Designers have definitely dragged the RX cabin out of the dark age doldrums of the last generation. Still, it's not as techy or as slick as a contemporary Mercedes-Benz, for example. You do still get a lot of classic flavour in here, although the time-honoured analog clock has been put in the bin, and a lot of die-hard Lexus fans are not going to be happy about that. It really does feel fit for a king or a queen in here, and it starts with a level of solidity, and it threads through to the variety of the textures and materials that Lexus has decided to use. Take, for example, the door trims. You get this nice sort of suede 70s tracksuit material here on the inserts, and the plastics on the outside are satiny and tactile. The F-Sport and F-Sport Performance both get fairly bucketed sport-style front seating. And they feature leather accented trim and this ultra suede on the outer wings, and have 8-way electric adjustment. You also get seat heating and seat cooling, which is also pretty nice. The F-Sport and F-Sport Performance comes in a choice of 2 colour schemes, which is black, albeit rather dark grey, and a more fetching colour called dark rose, which really does give the cabin a bit of a lift. The steering wheel is nice and fetching, but unlike the physical buttons on the lower grade versions, you do get touch sensitive controls on the higher grade versions. The TFT LCD driver's screen is set quite deep and does look quite conventional. Lexus has decided to eschew the sort of flat panel effect favoured by its German rivals, and to be honest, I think this particular format will age a lot better. That god-awful joystick-based multimedia system control from the last RX has thankfully gone into extinction like the dinosaurs. Instead, you get this huge, bright and clear touchscreen system that measures a whopping 14 inches. But as clear, bright and brimming with content as it is, some of the fonts and smaller details are difficult to read for those of us who need glasses. It gets a very clean and fetching looking mapping system as well as DAB+. Meanwhile, Apple CarPlay is wireless and Android Auto is wired, and whichever way you go, the audio source is pumped through a 21 speaker Mark Levinson sound system that does sound rather peachy. There is an inductive charge pad hidden below this panel, although if you do need to cable any of your devices, it does feature 5 USB-C ports and 1 USB-A. There's also 64 different colours of ambient lighting to choose from, and I do really love this double opening console lid. One of the really neat details is the HVAC controls, and Lexus has managed to integrate a lot of the interface into the touchscreen without burying the adjustment in the submenus. Good job. Head-up display, active noise control, and 3-zone climate control pretty much round out the niceties in the front end of the cabin. Right, let's check out row 2. As mentioned, RX is now a dedicated 5-seater, and what you lose in 7-seat flexibility, you gain in just the sheer amount of spaciousness in the rear. It's nice and airy, and part of that effect is the huge panoramic glass roof. Knee room is really good, toe room's not too bad, headroom with the sunroof, it's a little bit limited, but it's not too bad. There isn't any fore-aft adjustment for the seat bases, but you can adjust the amount of tilt. The seats back here are really comfy, and it really does suit more of a 2+2 format for my money. You also get in the back this rather elaborate center console arrangement with fold-out cup holders. In fact, the F Sport does lose some of the creature comforts that you do get in the Sport Luxury version, although you still get 2 USB-C ports in here, as well as a temperature control for the third zone outlets. Better yet, Lexus hasn't downgraded the rear accommodation, so all of the trim and the appointments are equal to those in the front end. There are also mechanical sunshades that are hidden in the doors. And all up, that limousine experience is helped by the fact the new RX is 60 mils longer in wheelbase than the old version. So far so roomy in here, so let's check out the boot. You can practice your soccer skills around the rear of the automatic tailgate, and it liberates 612 litres. You do get the flexibility of 40-20-40 split folding rear seating, and unlike other versions of the RX, you do get a space saver spare in the rear. But the really interesting stuff is under the bonnet, so let's go check it out. Right here, the 500h formula does get a little bit complicated. Both the 350 petrol and the 500h hybrid get 2.4 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder engines, but they're not the same. The 350 turbo petrol gets 205 kilowatts and 430 newton meters, but this engine makes 3 kilowatts less and 30 newton meters more. The hybrid version gets a 6-speed conventional auto rather than the 8-speed fitted in the turbo petrol version, but it doesn't fit a conventional torque converter, but rather a wet clutch pack to get it off the line. Added to this is an electric motor for each axle, and the front gets 64 kilowatts and 292 newton meters, whereas the rear electric motor gets 76 kilowatts and 169 newton meters. But it's the clutch pack that allows petrol and electric drive independently or together, hence the parallel design. Cut through all the complexity, and the upshot is that the system produces 273 kilowatts, which makes it the most powerful RX to date. Although with all the drive shuffling between petrol and electric drive, there is no peak torque figure. And it's a system that Lexus promises offers exceptional performance and economy. So that's what we're going to find out. Other trick tech is that the all-wheel drive system can vary from 70-30% front rear bias to 20-80% rear bias. For a start, let's be clear, this is not a plug-in hybrid. So basically the engine charges the battery and it sorts itself out. So when you do start the car up, it's a bit of a crapshoot as to whether or not it starts in electric mode or the turbo petrol engine decides to kick in. In this case, it's fully electric, so let's get going. Unsurprisingly, with this closed circuit hybrid system, it does characteristically feel not unlike a typical Toyota hybrid. Once you're on the move, that near 2.2 tons of mass is ever present. But what it does do is bring this sense of solidity, refinement, and sure-footedness. What you also immediately notice is that that whole sport performance theme is very, very sublime. It's more of an underpinning sense than it is anything that's sort of really overt or in your face. And that certainly extends to the 2.4 litre turbo petrol 4, which really doesn't have what you'd call scintillating character. It's not a conspicuously spicy machine, and there is an argument that it really probably should feel a little feistier on the move. We did drive the 500h at the international launch in the US, and we did remark that it does feel very taut and tied down, but not to the expense of nasty NVH. And now I've got a chance to sample it back here in the real world in Oz. I must say that there is a real maturity to its character. The new RX sits on what Lexus calls its lighter and stiffer GAK platform. And what it does bring to the party in F Sport performance tune is a really nicely struck balance of ride and handling. There's a typical suite of normal, sport and eco drive modes. But when you bury down in the dampers, you do get 2 settings, and both are pretty good, but not necessarily stellar. So while the RX can maintain pretty handy body control, it can get a little bit fizzy through the small frequency bumps, and a lot of that has to do with the sheer mass of those 21-inch wheels and those massive front brakes. They do tend to patter along against the top of the small imperfections, which sort of gives a bit of a rippling effect as you're cruising along. Apparently the adaptive suspension lends a big hand when it comes to controlling roll and pitch. So dynamically, the RX F Sport performance is pretty competent. The chassis is quite direct in its responses and reactive to driver inputs. But the sheer lateral inertia of the thing is a constant companion in the corners, and it doesn't exactly encourage you to push on. The grip from the Michelin tyres is actually pretty decent, although they are at 235 mils wide, quite a bit smaller than what you would get on a sport-infused premium SUV from Europe. Perhaps in compensation, the dynamic rear steering effect does help the car rotate quite a bit in particularly tight corners. The electric torque, however much that is, Lexus isn't saying, off the mark is pretty strident. And that does help fill in the torque hole of the turbo engine. Strangely enough, peak torque arrives well up at 4,300 RPM. So the petrol engine does need that low-end torque to get you off the mark or when you're overtaking. All in all though, the two electric motors and the petrol engine do pass the drive baton around fairly seamlessly. And I must say, the wet clutch system from the 6-speed auto is very smooth and clean off the mark. Quick? Lexus claims that the 500h F Sport performance will hit 100 kilometers an hour from a standstill in just 6.2 seconds. And it'll march on its way to a VMAX of 210 kilometers an hour. So we're going to put it on our test track to find out how valid those claims are. And its times are up on the screen right now. For what it's worth, it doesn't actually feel that quick, because what this car is lacking is real fanfare and fire. In fact, on balance, its real talent is in long-legged grand touring. That is, if this particular hybrid system can offer real benefits in terms of fuel economy. Which brings us neatly to ownership. Fuel economy? Well, Lexus claims that the 500h format is good for 6.5 litres combined. But after a week of driving this car around, it's returning figures closer to 8.5 to 8.7. Strange too is this parallel hybrid system returns a claim of 7.4, so it's thirstier around town on the form guide. Whereas a lot of the series parallel systems from Toyota tend to be a little thriftier around town. And we've also seen real world economy of the mid-6s for the 350h versions. So as a full fat all-you-can-eat version, fuel economy isn't terrible, but then it's not that great either. It's good news with servicing. It's capped at $695 per visit for the first 5 visits. And that's not terribly expensive for a premium luxury SUV with this much tech going on under the skin. While warranty is an industry average 5 years of unlimited kilometre coverage. In the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $1,443 to comprehensively insure a new Lexus RX. Everybody's situation is different and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, how you drive, and where you garage your car. This new 5th generation is a big evolutionary step for the RX breed, and that rings true for the 500h F Sport performance as it does for any of the other variants. It has great styling, a really fetching interior, and the 5-seat format offers oodles of space for occupants and luggage. And it's also managed to shake off so many of the old version's undesirable traits. Yes, 126 grand is a lot of coin, but logical German rivals asking for similar money are generally pretty tame and diesel. You could opt for a fairly fruity high-spec Genesis GV80, but then again, that's not hybrid either. In fact, if you're after a large premium SUV with turbocharged hybrid power, there really is not much competition out there. And provided that you tame your expectations about sportiness and performance, there is an awful lot to like about the flagship RX. So that's what I think, but how about you? Put your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe while you're at it, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.